Hey guys, Lumen02. Want to share a game of 100 card Singleton. This unfortunately is not 93-94 variant of it. I'm playing a deck called 4-Color Blood. My opponent is playing what is unknown to me to be a Grixis deck. So, to talk about, the deck I'm playing and the Grixis deck as it generally is in 100 card. So, I'm playing 4-Color Blood. 4-Color Blood is an aggressive mid-range deck. What that means is that it tend to rely on the most efficient answer cards and the most efficient threats. So its threats are stuff like Siege Rhino, Marchesa, Queen Marchesa, Anafenza, Tarmogoyf. There's essentially 5 cards that I tend to call Tarmogoyf, like number 2 through 5 in this deck. That's the model of the deck, so it tends to be very good against aggressive decks and also very good against control decks. Where it languishes is generally in mid-range value-based matchups. And I wouldn't even say it languishes. It's probably one of the better natural strategies in the format. Probably one of the best 50%, match-neutral decks. I go for a Thoughtseize here. I could have done this turn 1, but I opted not to because I wanted to leave my options open for casting, any of my 2-drops on turn 2, depending on what further my opponent did. So, I kind of make a heads-up play here. I play out the Elves of Deep Shadow to feign that I have an additional land so they don't counter it. It allows me to build up my mana base and, forces them to hold extra counter magic in hand if they have counter magic. At this point, I draw Horizon Canopy, which is pretty lucky because his hand is kind of trapped on white mana. I go ahead and cast the Fleecemane out first because I would prefer the Tarmogoyf to resolve. My opponent, I believe, at this point, they Ghost Quarter me, which I have 1 basic land in the whole deck, and then they cast Fire Covenant, taking a whole boatload of damage but killing my board. At this point, I go ahead and Abrupt Decay and then leave up Dromoka's Command. I want to get rid of the Deathrite Shaman because they're down to 2 lands. I want to have a cost to them being greedy with their Ghost Quarter to make mana they needed off of Deathrite Shaman. I've essentially taken them down off 2 mana. They do have a counter for the Siege Rhinoceros in the form of Mana Leak. I say okay to that. This deck will draw better than most mid-range control decks, which is what I generally consider Grixis, more of a controlling mid-range deck. It's kind of in a weird place. It's like a mid-range controlling deck / kind of aggro control. They can play some aggro control, but generally its threat density is too low to be a true aggro control deck. So they do get to Vendilion Click us. We do kill the Vendilion Click with the Zealous Persecution. Like I said, our ability to draw out of things is probably exponentially better than theirs is because our cards are just, generally speaking, all threats or flexible answers or answers to multiple things that are generally always relevant to enacting our proactive game plan. Corsair Crewfex is kind of the death knell because they finally run out of counterspells and removal, and we have the threat on the board. Get their card engine off, even though them taking damage probably isn't horrible for us. We have our own card engine, and we have a 3-power attacker, which is going to end the game in 2 turns if left unmolested. And if they kill this thing, then they're not countering my next spell, and I have 3 relevant spells in hand, all of which can kill my opponent within the next turn. They do go ahead and counterspell this. I could have cast out the Pride Mage on the first main to get a pump on the Corsair Crewfix. I didn't really see a need to expose 2 threats when one will do. If they draw a land and play Damnation, then I'm in a worse spot than if I have kept these 2 cards in my hand. So I'm happy to just force them to have the answer. And if they don't, well, then eventually it's going to win me the game, and here it does. So I'm kind of skeptical of Grixis in 100 card. I know it's done well in like some Australian Highlander, and probably in some metas it's fine. The issue I have with it doesn't really have the... It has too much card variation, so it has a lot of point removal, some mass removal, some counterspells, some threats. But the issue I have with its density and type of cards is that it doesn't make it truly a great control mirror deck. If it is, it has to play as an aggro control deck, but it's just not a great aggro control deck like Jeskai is. Because it's going to have a lot more dead cards than your Azorius or Esper, control. It's going to have more dead cards than Blue Red Moon. It also dies to moon effects, which is kind of a frailty of the deck, despite it being a worse natural strategy against a lot of the decks in the format, which is another thing I don't like about it. All of that said, I will say this. I am actually in love with Grixis decks. I think they are probably the most fun to play because, generally speaking, they're going to play fair magic, and all of your decisions with the deck should be very challenging because most of your cards are 1-for-1 exchanges. That all said, That makes the game more challenging because you can't just cast a Wrath when it's obvious you need to cast a Wrath. You need to use a specific point removal spell, and you're generally going to play very tight games. However, all that said, I think they are in a bad spot. I think this is a horrible matchup because I'm basically playing a best of, bombs list from red, green, black, and white. And it's going to rapidly overwhelm my opponent's lesser density of cards that they have to deal with it. That's kind of how we got to play it. We just got to keep a consistent threat on them, try to maintain some form of card advantage against them, which we're generally going to be able to do because they're going to have to 1-for-1 us. And even when they don't 1-for-1 us, you saw like their removal cards are like Toxic Deluge or Fire Covenant, where they take a boatload of damage, which is still pretty good for us. We're not playing completely by the philosophy of Fire here, where we're just trading cards for damage, but in this matchup, I think we can play that way. So they do have Toxic Deluge here. That's fine. I actually knew there was a chance they'd have this, and I was fine with it because I can bolt them and then attack them with Raging Ravine and put them down to 4. And then I have a Thrun to follow that up, which is not horrible. And if I ever find a fetch land, I have the Rallier to kind of get some extra value. And I have Lightning Helix, which this should have put them to dead, but they had a duress. Again, the deck does what it does, and top decks just gas because all of the threats are just gas in this deck. And I cast a Siege Rhino and win anyways. And it may seem lucky, and it's not a bad draw, it's a very lucky draw, but that's what this deck does. That's how it works. That's why you choose to play it, because it's a good stuff deck that just has like extremely high card quality. And, the Grixis strategy may be more pointed and, more intricate and interesting to play, and probably more skill intensive than 4-Color Blood. It doesn't really hold a candle to this natural strategy of just casting good stuff that wins the game very efficiently and very well. So, I played another game against this opponent, and, after that first one, I kind of felt bad that we gave him a bad matchup, but I didn't know what I was going to be facing. So, I played with my Grixis deck. I actually probably have like 6 to 8 Grixis lists. I really do like the deck. I just don't... I've brought it to tournaments probably 2 to 3 times, and I've never really been happy with it, because it can't beat red deck wins. It has a tough time against other control mirrors because of all the removal it has in it. So I've just never been like hugely convinced that the deck was like the right thing to be playing in Highlander, even though I do enjoy playing it and think it's very fun to play. This hand is great, obviously. I have, some creature removal in the form of Dismember, a Ponder to eventually smooth my draw out. This Baleful Strix, which my opponent snap counters, which I'm fine with here. I think they mana leak it or something like that. They daze it, hard cast a daze on it, which is fine by me. Strix, I don't think I would have countered if I were them, but that's just me. I actually just jam here. I say, hey, have another counter. And they pay the price for not saving days for another turn. Because I think Liliana's probably better. I have seeded their hand at this point, so they drew Kolaghan's Command, and they have Fire/Ice to deal with the Liliana. Still a 2-for-1. And actually, I'm sorry, they have Fire Ice in hand, but they drew in another Arc Trail. That card eventually is going to be great. I do like the Dire Fleet Daredevil. I think the card is stellar. I get to cast Fall here, which is good. It forces them just to burn me for 2, which is no value, and then discard their Vendilion Click. And at this point, they're out of cards, and I'm kind of in the department of looking for a land, so I can utilize the Dire Fleet Daredevil or jam the Jace. I find Thing in the Ice. I think I go to second main and then cast Thing in the Ice, because I don't really mind if it gets countered. My opponent actually doesn't counter it, shockingly. I've got a good answer in the form of Dismember, which I've held on to all this game for the Creeping Tar Pit if my opponent activates it, and I do have this bad Mana Leak / Complicate to counter any spell that can be countered with it. They opt to go for the Creeping Tar Pit, so I kill the Creeping Tizzle with Dismember and take a counter off the Thing in the Ice. I'm pretty sure my opponent's not on counter magic, so I just go ahead and jam the Jace here because I think it's probably the strongest play. I do plus it because they have shown that they have a decent amount of burn in their deck, and I would hate to have my Jace get burned down from 3, which is a much more fragile number than 5. And when they find another land, it's pretty apparent they found another land off the top. I feel very good about this game. They go ahead and counterspell the Ancestral Visions. I have to accept that. I mean, I could complicate it, but that doesn't really change anything. If I counterspell with Jace at this point, they cast out a Dark Confidant. I just go ahead and counterspell this to remove a counter from the Thing in the Ice. My hope is that I can get this Dire Fleet Daredevil down and get the Kolaghan's Command to return the Baleful Strix from my graveyard to get some value. But I actually opt to go with Vendilion Click here. My opponent has something that really is relevant. They have a Sinkhole and a land. I go ahead and cycle this. I don't really care if the land gets destroyed. I don't think Sinkhole is right in Grixis. I think it's too situational of a card. I think you'd almost always rather have him to Turek. And double black can be challenging, especially when you're relying on a lot of blue mana, like double blue mana at the 2 spot. I could have played out the Dire Fleet here, but because I'm down a red mana source due to Sinkhole, I can't. My opponent draws very well. They top deck a Kess. Although I'm lucky and able to turn this around. So, far be it from me to slow roll. But I actually could have flipped the Awoken Horror. What I wanted to do is kind of see what their top deck was. It ends up playing out well because I get to Vendilion Click, leaving that card in their hand, then cast on the Dire Fleet, utilize the Dire Fleet to get the Kolaghan's Command to force them to discard and then redraw our correction, do 2 damage to them, and then attack for lethal. So they would discard their Kess, take 2 down to 9, and then take 10 off of the Vendilion Click plus Awoken Horror. So we're able to kind of handily out-tempo them there in the Grixis mirror. It was actually a pretty fun game. I definitely enjoy playing Grixis because I think it is a challenging deck to play. I just think it has too many bad matchups. I think its good matchups probably include like value-based mid-range, then like white aggro. Red aggro is terrible. Control mirrors tend to be pretty bad because you just have too many dead. You have more dead cards than they do. They have more permission, and you have like more like permission plus removal. You have like the best permission and like the best removal, but they have a ton more permission, which is just better because your removal does nothing, and their permission, like by the time they get to like 20 lands, is always going to work. They go ahead and cast a Dak Fade down here. I mana leak this, and I'm actually very happy they took the turn to cast a spell because that means I'm going to get to resolve my True Name Nemesis, which is a strong one. Unfortunately, we're soon to find out they have a disappointing Diabolic Edict, which is unfortunate. Not a lot of decks main deck that. Maybe they sideboarded into it. I tend to only have like Toxic Deluge and like Liliana to deal with that card generally. But I mean, obviously, Diabolic Edict is a card that's sideboarded pretty often in like Legacy, but not as much in 100 card. I have run it main and actually this style of deck, but I think I took it out. It just underperformed too often for me that I didn't really care for it. Plus, the meta that I was in was more of a swarm style aggro, like a bunch of white cards, and Diabolic Edict is horrible against that. I actually don't mind that they're Dust Bowling me here because I have plenty of land permanents, and I'm going to get to resolve a Dig Through Time here, which is pretty strong. So I get an additional land because I figure if they're going to go on the Dust Bowl plan, I'm going to be losing a bunch of my land cards. They go for a Dire Fleet Daredevil on my Dig Through Time, which I totally intend on picking off with Dissolve to get a Scry. Dire Fleet Daredevil was a new add to my Grixis list when the card came out. I want to try it. I'm not sure if it's great enough yet. It's obviously very good in the mirror. Pick up an Arc Trail. This is a sizable misplay, so this is a misclick. Really, I wouldn't even call it a misplay, but a misclick. I accidentally click on myself as opposed to my opponent. I should have done 2 to them, down to 16, and then 1 to their Dire Fleet. And actually, it would have significantly changed the game. And we probably should have been punished for that. I mean, error. I wouldn't really call it a misplay, because I mean, I know better. If I was playing in real life, that would never. I would never be like, I target myself for 1 and target your Dire Fleet for 2. It's just a misclick. I think I was on the phone at the time of playing the game. I do resolve this Tombstalker, which seems like it's probably going to get very close to going all the way. I could try to go like burn on them with the Burst Lightning, but I'm going to save it for removal because I think their threat package is generally going to fold to it. I do find a Hymn to Turek and a Factor Fiction. I go ahead and Hymn to Turek them here just to see what's going on. Find Is It Charm and a Grim Lavamancer, both very strong cards. They have a Bob. I go to burn this off. If they have Mana Leak, that's a big time beating, but if they just have Miscalc, I think I'm fine with that. I go ahead, get in there, attack to see if they have like removal so I can be assured that it's not counter magic. I go ahead and do this on their upkeep so that if they do have counter magic, I'm forcing them to tap out on their turn. I don't take the Mystical Tutor and the Liliana. I take the Kolaghan's Command, Remand, and Dark Slick Shores. They have Kess, again, which they've top decked here, which is pretty strong. I go ahead and put Kess back in their hand, play out the Necropolis, utilize Kolaghan's Command to dome them for 2 and remove their Kess from their hand. They no, actually they don't top deck this turn, so we get one more hit in on them, but we're kind of drawing dead. We've been hitting a lot of lands recently. Get them down to 1 here. Now, at this point, they should be dead. They should be at -1 because we screwed up with that Arc Trail. They debate using Dust Bowl, I assume. And they top deck a Jace the Mind Sculptor. So, a very strong top deck for them. I find Terminate, which is probably not going to be good in this situation. I do go ahead and recast out the Tomb Stalker here, and their last card in hand is a counter spell. I go ahead and spell Pierce it, and resolve my Tomb Stalker, leaving up the Terminate at this point. My opponent goes for a draw 3, managed to luck out and find a 1-for-1 removal spell. I don't know what they intended on doing if they did not find it. I think bouncing it was probably the right call there, so they could just get an extra free draw step or two. I think you bounce it that turn and then draw the next turn to try to find something. They go ahead and Dust Bowl me. I'm fine if they're Dust Bowling me here because Dust Bowl really doesn't, I think it's going to impact them more than it will impact me. Now, the fact that they're on 1 life is only relevant in so much as that they cannot utilize fetch lands anymore. However, at this point, I'm pretty sure I'm probably actually going to lose the game because my opponent's able to see so many cards every turn. And really, my window to kill them kind of passed about a turn ago. At this point, I assume they're probably on some sort of counter magic. The good news is, though, is they're going to have a tough time shuffling their deck because of their low life total and inability to pop fetch lands. There's another fetch. The other thing that I have to consider here is that I can probably beat them on efficiency. I have a lot more blue mana symbols available to me than they do, which means that if I can ever get them to Dust Bowl on my end step and I get into the burn spell, I can possibly protect it with Force of Will, Disallow, and maybe other blue counter magic. Draw another fetch. Kind of disappointing. Just alright, well, we did this to ourselves with the Arc Trail. The game should be over. And being fair, our opponent did top deck the Jace kind of in the dark, just cast counterspell Jace was his draw sequence. Undermine is an instrument by which we can win this game, and we have enough counter magic in hand that it's possible that we could win a counter fight here. The fact they're still Dust Bowling does not dissuade me because it's going to limit their ability to counter my spells on their turn. They cast a Baleful Strix, and I just go ahead and go for Undermine here. My opponent has Spell Pierce. I say, okay, dude, I'll pay for it. They have Force Spike. I say, okay, I will pay for that as well. And then I still have Disallow up. But they evidently are out of counter magic at that point in time. And I'm able to get there with the Undermine. So despite, a sizable misclick resulting in, what would have been a much more short game, we're able to eventually get there just kind of based on mana efficiency against the Grixis Mirror. A couple of things of note. I am actually not a big fan at all of Dust Bowl in the 100-card format, especially on 3-color decks that really want blue, really have color-specific requirements. If the guy's playing Sinkhole, he's probably playing Hymn to Turek as well. Playing cards like Counterspell, Mana Drain, Dust Bowl makes it a lot more difficult to cast your cards. So I'm not a huge fan of it in Grixis. I like Wasteland. If you're playing a pointed system and have Strip Mine available to you, Strip Mine's not bad, but it's a lot of points. But Dust Bowl, I think, is just bad. I think it takes too much resources to use, and in a Control Mirror, I don't like it because if I have a fast effect, like a burn spell, and my opponent has essentially had to tap down 4 mana, then it automatically puts me ahead on mana efficiency to fight a counter fight over, burn spell or a relevant instant speed spell or a flash creature or something like that. So kind of my take on the matchup. I do think Grixis is very cool. I also think it's kind of in a rough place, generally speaking. I think it has to be a very meta-specific call to run Grixis. And that's because it's kind of in a weird spot where it's kind of an aggro control deck. It's kind of a control mid-range deck. But it's not really the best either. I think Bug is probably the best, control mid-range deck. I think Jeskai is probably the best aggro control deck. So Grixis tends to vacillate somewhere in between the two. I've tried doing a bigger Grixis build, but I just wasn't happy with how it came out, big stuff like Karn and stuff like that. It didn't work. It's just too inefficient. The deck is very sweet, though, very fun to play. Where it languishes is against, like I said, red deck wins, hyper aggro, burn style aggro. Against weenie style decks, it tends to do okay because it has a decent bit of mass removal, and taking damage against those style of decks tends not to be a problem because they're not generally going to kill you at instant speed. They're generally going to kill you through the combat step. Very good against green decks, but again, in the mirror, the blue-white or Esper, control mirror or blue-red moon control mirror, I think you tend to be very disadvantaged. I think you're also disadvantaged against Sultai Loam control. I think that's just a better deck, I think, than this one is. Especially once it gets the Loam engine online. If it can find an opportunity to get that online, you're probably never going to win because it's certainly a better combo than Dust Bowl. that all said, very fun deck to play. Very cool matches against my opponent with both my Grixis build against their Grixis build and then 4-color blood against Grixis. Hope you guys enjoyed it, possibly learned something, and if this is a format that interests you, I hope you'll join us some Saturday at a tournament to play it out. All right, guys, enjoy and take care now.